Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. I apologize we did not have an episode last week. Things have been a little bit crazy around here, both with family, with work, and of course with Andor coming out, which we're doing episode by episode coverage on over on Star Wars Universe Podcast. So I apologize. I think we're going to be able to keep an episode a week going, but it might be a little bit all over the place for the next couple of weeks, but we'll do the best we can. But today we have an episode that we've only been planning to do for about 3 months, or actually even longer. You all know Will Freeland and Steve Storman, who are two fantastic comics guys. They are the two hosts of the Hype is My Superpower podcast, where they talk about comics. And we've had a lot of fun getting them on to talk about some of these MCU shows and how they are showing up in comics versus on screen. What's the difference? What's the same? We're calling it Marvel on page and on screen. Moon Knight finished, and we were all super excited to record on Moon Knight for that topic, and then scheduling happened, and then we realized we hadn't scheduled anything till the end of Ms. Marvel and thought, oh, well, okay, now we should do it for both of them. And we are finally doing that episode for Ms. Marvel and Moon Knight today. So, a little late, but hopefully it's giving you time to kind of think about those things more, and we'll be getting on all the questions about, what happened in the comics, what happened in TV, how did the TVs represent what happened from the comics. And as always here, this is an ethics podcast. We're not going to talk about it in terms of what the costumes look like necessarily, but more just in terms of what are the questions that they're addressing in the comics, how do they address them on screen, and what's similar, what's the difference, and what do we think of the changes. All that and more after a commercial break that will be shorter than this intro, but I do not have any control over. Welcome back. I am Matt Matthew, the Fox, the Box, the Hawks, and I am so happy to be here with Paul, who's going to give a similar introduction. I am Matthew, they, them pronouns, passing it over to Paul.
Yeah, I'm Zen Madman. What's up?
Wow. Hoppin' Man, Hoppinator.
That's not what we do. By we, I'm using the royal we. Clearly, that's what the you part of a we does.
I apparently had more sugar in my cereal than I thought this morning. We're a little hyped up. All right, so Paul is here. Matthew
makes
is here.
sense with Hype is My Superpower on.
Well,
that's true.
I am
that's
hyped.
True. I'm not the one here to bring hype. Let's turn it over to the hype ones.
All right, which one is high and which one is puh?
I guess I'm high. Well, Steve's taller. He's the high.
Okay.
I'm just the...
That's true. My name's Steve Storman. I'm co-host of Hype is My Superpower. And, my pronouns are he and him. And his and himself, I believe strongly in ending reflexive and possessive erasure.
No. Much appreciated.
Well, I mean... I'm Will Freeland. I am the other half of Hype is My Superpower. And he, him, all that stuff I'm really bad at.
Grammar.
Yeah.
Grammar is not our forte, and that's perfectly okay. All right. So
grammar is not our superpower.
Overall, let me just kind of start here. We've now had 2 of those shows. We had just to acknowledge, we know She-Hulk has come out. There's so much talk being had about it right now, and I'm actually going to be recording an episode on She-Hulk tomorrow, which may come out before or after this episode. I'm not sure yet. But so we're not going to be talking about She-Hulk as much today. We know it's happened, but just because there's so much about it already. But looking at Marvel and Moon Knight and some of the other stuff, just in general, where are you right now in terms of how you feel about what the MCU is doing with the comics that you love so much?
I'm having a great time with it, honestly. Avoiding the subject of She-Hulk, which I also enjoyed. Ms. Marvel was a really fun, innocent refresher, I feel like, of just a new perspective on the MCU, of having just an innocent fangirl that who we get introduced to somebody who actually idolizes a known hero that isn't just a throwaway somebody's downstairs neighbor character. And we get to really kind of explore how does somebody act when they are inspired by another hero that we've already met. So that's been a lot of fun. And then you have just the mind game insanity that is Moon Knight, who is routinely either my third or fourth favorite superhero in the Marvel Comics. And he's just, it's another, he brings another like aspect or another perspective on how to be a superhero or what is a superhero in this world. And I feel like with these Disney Plus shows in general, they've been able to show other ways to be a hero, or to be like a powered individual in the MCU. It's not like, if everyone gets introduced in a movie that has to be flashy and Hollywood and blockbuster, it's going to start to feel kind of cookie cutter. And so with these borderline street level, or at least like smaller scale heroes, showing how they can fit in the world, but also tell a heartfelt or personal story and still be a powered individual that wants to do some good in the world. It's just expanding the realm of superheroism, and I'm just having such a good time watching it all happen. That was really long. I apologize.
For me, I'm pretty stoked. I think each individual show has been good. I've enjoyed, with the exception of maybe Falcon the Winter Soldier. I've appreciated enjoyed all the Disney Plus shows. But I have to say, as I was doing the, kind of like composing my thoughts about Ms. Marvel, I realized I'm kind of concerned that they're just blowing through so many concepts so quickly, and I'm worried that they're kind of like setting them up to throw away. I think part of the idea of comics is that everybody has these long continuities, and everything just goes and goes and goes and goes, and so you get some serialized storytelling and character development that necessarily takes a long time to accomplish. And part of me wishes that we might have gotten this Moon Knight series like 3 years from now, and instead we would get a second season of Hawkeye or She-Hulk, or I guess Loki's getting a second season. But like let's take our time and develop some concepts. But besides that, I'm really enjoying what they're actually putting out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can agree with that. Like it sometimes Marvel feels like it's we're drinking from a fire hose kind of idea, where there's just so much content coming out.
Yeah, we've got 80 years of IP to catch up on, and we want to capitalize on all of it before the fad ends or something, instead of just like chill.
Now, Paul, am I right? These are Moon Knight and Ms. Marvel are not characters you knew from comics?
That's correct. I mean, Moon Knight I had like no idea about. I just knew that a lot of people were really excited to see Moon Knight, and I got to see it with just like a totally clean slate. Like, all right, what do we got here? Which was super fun. Ms. Marvel, I was aware of the character mostly from listening to Hype Is My Superpower. Actually, there were a bunch of episodes talking about her, and I was like, oh, I want to see this character on screen. And I really enjoyed the portrayals of both. I feel like structurally, every Disney Plus show has had I've had some gripes with them, to varying degrees. Moon Knight definitely the least out of any of the Disney Plus shows. And then Ms. Marvel, I was kind of like, I didn't really understand why they had to make it all about like saving the world in another dimension and all this stuff, when like the first 2 episodes where she's just like chilling in high school failing her driver's test, like they were great. I was like, I kind of feel like maybe let's keep these characters smaller for a little longer, and then they can gradually get drawn into the bigger stakes stuff. It's not like I don't want to see like a self-described brown girl from Jersey City save the world. I just like don't want that to be like the first thing she does, kind of, like I want her to get there, and so it just feels, it does feel a little bit like kind of some of the series are like a little rushed and whatever, but like I love the characters. I wasn't that excited to see the Marvels until I saw Ms. Marvel, and now I'm like, that's one of the few things that I'm actually like, yeah, I think I want to see that, because like this character is just delightful. And so refreshing. You know, it's like a very different character, not just because like she's Pakistani and because she's like a teenage girl, but like because she grew up in that world and really experienced it, and just actually is very different as a character in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. And I kind of harping on, Paul, what you said, and going back to what you were saying, Will, I think one of the things that I liked most about Ms. Marvel, and I'm curious about how this kind of aspect is dealt with in comics, every time I see these movies, one of the things that's always in my head with any kind of like fantasy or sci-fi or superhero stuff is like there are certain pieces of information that I think if the world knew, the world would be a somewhat fundamentally different place. You know, if we knew that aliens existed, if we knew that like we were under threat of planetary destruction on the regular. I mean,
Who's to say
we
we're
are
not?
long term very much right now in our world, but I mean more in like, oh yeah, like no, it could happen in 2 days, except for this person did this cool thing, you know. And I just love the idea that in this world, yes, everyone knows about these characters, so much so that a young girl might totally have one as her idol instead of like a music star or a movie star or something like that. I loved that so much in Ms. Marvel, and kind of to take kind of on what you were saying, like it's now this idea of like we're getting a second generation. You know, we're getting heroes who were raised in the world that knows about heroes. How is that comparing to the comic? 'Cause my understanding is like in the comics, by this point, everyone knows that all these heroes are out there and that all these things are existing.
Oh yeah.
Did you see kind of like were you happy kind of seeing that kind of going in that same direction as the comics, or is it in the comics so fundamentally different? Talk about that a bit.
See if you want to go first.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's absolutely, like, it's a huge part of the core idea of Ms. Marvel, of Kamala Khan, is that comics love to have derivative characters, right? And so, like, so for readers who are unfamiliar with the history, Carol Danvers went by the superhero name, the pseudonym Ms. Marvel, for a long time. And Captain Marvel was a succession of male characters. And, you know, finally they're like, let's just stop like beating around the bush. Like, this is our strongest, longest running character in here. This is a gender neutral title. Let's give her the elevation that she deserves. And, you know, she took up the mantle of Captain Marvel, and it was a really successful run. That development in the character has stuck ever since. And so they're like, well, Ms. Marvel isn't being used. Who's the next one? And there was a editorial and creative push. The Marvel editor, Sana Amanat, was who is Pakistani herself, was kind of big into pushing to get this character created. And so a lot of Marvel churns through a lot of new characters all the time in the comics. You'll see somebody pop up and they're like, oh, we have a new Werewolf by Night. Oh, we have a new, you know, this or that. And Will is scowling at what the new Werewolf by Night was. But, you know, this happens a lot. You've got all these like reimaginings, recastings, reinterpretations. Kamala Khan stuck. And she's stuck in the comics because she's a great character and she was extremely well executed. And so, I mean, that's really what I was looking for the most, is just how do they do it at bringing this concept to life. But yeah. Sorry, to answer your original question, she is a derivative character, but they managed to do it in a way that it makes sense. That they called the deep continuity into focus and used it in a way that reflects their fans. It's important that Kamala Khan is a superhero fan, not just because it's a way to be lived in and self-referential within the world itself, but it is a very distinct reflection of the people watching the show or reading the comics and be like, I love Marvel. I love superheroes. I am just like Kamala Khan, who is going through this herself.
And so in the universe of the comics, is being a fan of a superhero, is that kind of like a real sort of cult niche kind of thing, or is it like Captain Marvel and Iron Man are like, Kesha and Tom Cruise and Megan Thee Stallion or whatever? Like, what level of celebrity do they have in the comics universe?
Well, I mean, it's framed from the perspective of the title character in the first place. Mm-hmm. So for us to say, well, they're at the level of like Michael Jackson, Brad Pitt, like the best of the best, but that's because these stories are being told from Michael Jackson's perspective, from Brad Pitt's perspective. And so the people around them are only going to be, the civilians around them are either going to be the outspoken haters or the extreme supporters, generally.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to accurately say that or answer that question outside of like, well, they're very popular people.
You raise a really good point. It's that, like Tony Stark is a celebrity generally, although often they're like, oh, he has a secret identity because that's what superheroes were for so long. And the public doesn't know he's Iron Man. Whoopsie-doo. And then, like the Fantastic Four are also just like massive celebrities in the comics. But in terms of like seeing that how often it is for a character to be a fan of the book of these celebrity characters, extremely rare, because like Will said, most of the comics are from the perspective of the celebrity, not from the perspective of somebody who would be in position to be a fan.
Mm-hmm. And then there's not a bunch of comics about a bunch of people who aren't fans and aren't haters and are just like walking down the
trying
street,
to go to work,
doing their thing, right?
Like on Times Square, and getting disrupted by the fight like, that happens every 6 hours.
Another invasion! I'm gonna have to take the E train instead.
Yeah.
I do love the idea of like, the traffic reports just being like, oh, yep, and there's a tidal wave over on the river, so you can't take the Highway 12, stick over to 65 and the hope there isn't an earthquake today.
Traffic's backed up on the Ed Koch Queensboro Bridge because another Doc Ock attack. Looks like Spider-Man's got it. Delay shouldn't be more than 2 hours.
There you go. All right, well, so let's get into the individual shows. And we were talking about Ms. Marvel, so let's kind of start with that one. It sounds like, Steve and Will, you were both kind of big fans of the comics. Kind of, how did you feel about the character going into the show? Like, expectations or hopes or concerns?
I was excited because I do really like Ms. Marvel. She was, in her first run, she was a fangirl first, hero second. And so if she ever had an opportunity to do a team up, she'd just geek out first and be like, "Oh my gosh, Spider-Man! I can't believe I got to beat you! I loved the fight. How you solved the problem when you fought Doc Ock that one time. This, that, and the other." And like Agent Coulson got introduced in the comics thanks to Avengers, and because in the MCU he was like a Captain America fanboy. He's a similar superhero fanboy in the comics, and so very early on Miss Marvel crosses paths with the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that they tried to do, and she and Coulson got into a fight about the accuracy of the type of gun that they used and which enemy used it. And like that's just the stuff that's so much fun. And with Miss Marvel there's so much heart. Like it's the inner monologues in comics that speak to the soul on the most part, and some of the monologues that she had that are like the story conclusion wrap up of just like, I messed up, I didn't look at the people around me, I didn't realize the support group that I had in my friends, this, that, and the other, that you lose that with the bigger, like we're not all blind lawyers that have best friends that will always be there for them. We're not all ex-high school teachers that ended up creating a tech business that fell apart and have a revolving door of super committed girlfriends. We don't have a frame of reference for all this, but we've all been in high school and we've all had that circle of friends that has had to prove to us and remind us that we have a circle of support around us. And Miss Marvel does that so well in the comics.
Yeah.
I want to hear more on that, but I just need to interject with, as you were talking, I got this wonderful image. I don't know if it ever happened in comics. It probably shouldn't ever happen on screen, but like, I just want the moment where Agent Coulson finally finds someone who cares about his cards, the cards he has, and like watching
Yes.
Kamala like geek out with him about they're awesome. So
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think that has happened.
But that is
I'm trying not to
the
tangent
type of,
on
that's
random
the type of
616
interaction.
stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was nervous about or concerned about going into Miss Marvel is in the comics you can do a Captain Marvel Carol Danvers fangirl much more easily because there's decades worth of stories that you can be inspired by for this character. In the MCU, she's had one movie.
Yeah.
She showed up in the 90s and disappeared for 30 years and then came back and fought at in Endgame where there's no civilians because it's a giant battlefield. And then I'm led to believe that she goes back off world to go and help save other planets. I didn't feel like you could organically have a Kamala Khan that fangirls on Carol Danvers when I don't feel like she's spent much time on Earth to be that inspiration. So, like, I appreciate that they kept the fangirl for Carol Danvers. I just don't think Carol has earned that level of fangirl in the MCU.
That's fair.
Like most of what she did was like secret, right? Everything in the 90s
Yeah.
nobody knows about. And like if that had been
Right.
some huge public thing like the Battle of New York or whatever, then it makes more sense that people actually saw, right? But somehow there has to be information that has gotten out about,
Right.
the big showdown with Thanos that like they don't really explain how, but like
hey, she single-handedly destroyed the huge ship. I think that alone would get
Right,
That's
right.
fine.
But who saw it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for me, I was really excited for Kamala Khan in the MCU, just on the strength of what an incredible character she is. I'm on record, I think on this pod and on our own, for saying that she's the best character that Marvel has created since Wolverine, or thereabouts. Like, and that's 40 years later or something like that. Like a really just fantastically deep, well-drawn character. And the length of time for that is really important too. She's the contemporary Spider-Man in a lot of ways. Like she has an origin and sort of like a standpoint that makes sense for contemporary young people in a way that, it still works for Spider-Man. It's a primordial myth, but like you fudge it a little bit, or you change it, you update it for the times. Kamala Khan is absolutely, a character of contemporary times, and I was really excited to see her sort of like fast tracked to an adaptation based on just the incredible strength of character.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I saw in the show that I'm curious about is, until now, for the most part, like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. were definitely like mostly considered heroic. Obviously, they then became Hydra, and everything went bad with that. But like, there's generally been this sense of the sort of institutions that are being built to support the superheroes are somewhat friendly. And with Damage Control, we've gotten in a couple of things now, but I think it really came out here where Damage Control really winds up being the main antagonist, at least in the final episode, and because the whole world plot is the little... We're just going to leave that be.
Yeah.
But Damage Control is one of the main antagonists. And I really liked that because it felt like a first step towards the more kind of X-Men-y world, which, as I think about it, is probably not all coincidental, where Like, being a superhero doesn't just mean that you're like a celebrity, but it could mean that you're hunted. It could mean that you're a target, all this kind of stuff. Is that something that's also very true from the comics?
Well, damage control is very different in the comics.
Yeah, extremely.
They're the damage control is the superhero cleanup crew, much like what Adrian Toomes' company was in Homecoming. That
I was
was
about to call
damage
him
control.
Birdman.
Yeah.
When you were searching for the word, I was like, Birdman. Wait, that's not it. Batman. No,
That's damage
Vulture?
control in the
Yeah.
comics. And so to introduce them as this kind of controlling antagonist because Shield doesn't exist, I get it. It's an easy pull, and it's an easy group name to shift the meaning of. So are there organizations that work to be anti the hero or group that we are following? Yes. Is it damage control? No.
And they
answer
exist
that question.
by the dozens in the comics. If there isn't one at the present moment, they'll make one up. There's, you know,
that's
you
fair.
can just pull out of a grab bag of shady government agencies for
Right.
literally any government in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is true in
most
reality,
commonly-
also. Unfortunately,
Yeah. Usually it's saved for groups, like the group that's going or who antagonists for like the Avengers or the X-Men will have the government specifically, or like the Department of One or Friends Against Humanity, like Friends of Humanity. I mean, but for
Those
the single
Quakers really
title-
hate humans.
for the single characters, you don't typically see the same bad guy group show up often, with the exception of Roxxon against Thor. But that's because Roxxon likes to tap into other realities and other realms for their energy. So
They're also a corporation, not a government agency. But yeah,
also that.
I mean, what's the
Because
difference?
there's a difference?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Publicly there is.
Right.
do you feel at all like they kind of spent the whole Shield Hydra arc, that they kind of like spent that early, and then now in the MCU, now they're like, oh, we'll use sword, we'll use damage control, like they're kind of
Yeah,
sort of
I mean,
trying to replace them, but.
the Shield Hydra arc, you know, happens every like 6 months in the comic. I mean,
The
slightly
comics, right.
exaggerating, but like
Right,
it Shield falls and gets rubber banded back over and over and over again in the comics. It's so if they're really, the thing that's more remarkable to me is that they're trying to make this stick.
Right. Which is funny because they even made a TV show in which
Right.
Shield was completely rebuilt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But that's not quite in the same continuity, so yeah.
or something.
Yeah, I do think doing the whole Hydra reveal and tearing down Shield, while it made for an amazing Winter Soldier movie,
Yeah.
I think it was kind of premature in terms of like the age of the MCU and where they wanted to go with it.
Well,
Right.
but they had no idea how long it was going to last, too. so-
Absolutely, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like they want to do all of the big stories because
Yeah.
that Hydra reveal for Shield is. I even talked about it. I talked about it on my Twitch literally last night, but just like it's one of my favorite storylines from Hickman, that he just does these kinds of reveals and actually makes it work within the continuity of the established universe.
So,
But yeah,
I don't mean to if we I don't mean to do a hard change of subject here, but
go for it.
can we change? Can we talk a little bit about the changes, the differences between the comics and the TV show in Ms.
Yeah, go
Marvel?
for it.
Because I feel like that's a really good jumping on point to like some of the things that worked and kind of poking at some of the things that were different in the show and why they were different, right? So, I mean, the most obvious changes are the powers and the origins.
right.
In the comics, Kamala Khan is not connected to Clandestine at all. She's also, and I don't know how much we want to talk about the spoilers of the absolute last post-credit scene.
I think if you're listening
It's
to
fair
this, we're
fair
assuming
game at this point. It's been a
you've
while.
seen all of Ms.
Yeah,
Marvel
yeah.
and you've seen all of Moon Knight.
Okay, so she's revealed to be a mutant at the end, basically. In the comics, she's an Inhuman. She's an Inhuman because Marvel didn't own the film rights to X-Men, and so they went through these giant giant backflips and somersaults in order to make the Inhumans the new X-Men for a while, because they didn't want to introduce new X-Men characters that they wouldn't own movie rights to. So Kamala Khan feels pretty straightforward as a mutant, but is not. So it makes sense to me that this feels correct, but the change in the powers, I'm mostly okay with it. I think the only problem, so she has shape-changing powers, and a lot of it really plays to the strength of the art of the first artist on Ms. Marvel, Adrian Alphona, who really does sort of wispy, unreal geometry really well. And so she has these sort of awkward movements of gangly spindle arms and big punchy fists, and if she needs to get somewhere quickly, she'll just grow really long legs and walk, right? And so it kind of plays on this aspect of puberty in the coming of age tale, where it's oh, your body's all weird, you don't know what's going on, and you're not totally in control. So that's kind of I could see that being something that she would be stuck with long after the metaphor is viable, but it is a difference, and it had some metaphorical weight. It's not just fan nitpicking to say, hey, it's different, and I don't like different.
So I really appreciate the way you explained that, because I had always, the only people who I had heard complaining about the change in powers, it did seem like what I was hearing was more the fan nitpicking, they want it to be exactly the same. And my understanding is that a big part of it was because the incredible artistic effects you're talking about on page, they just couldn't find a good way to do it on screen, and so they did it this way. And hopefully they figured out by Fantastic Four, but that's a whole other story. But I do really like what you're saying there about because I think one of the reasons why Kamala is so powerful is because she is so representative, both of very specific communities that have never been really represented on screen, Pakistani, Muslim, brown, all the different things.
Yes.
And we've had people of color, to be sure, but just more is always good, and young girl, teenage girl. But also, like you said, but also as Will was saying, she also is we've all been in high school, even if we haven't been like that. And we've all probably gone through some level of puberty and our body doing things we don't quite understand and all that stuff. And I love the idea that superpower wasn't just oh, but it looks cool. But it was one more metaphor about her character and what she stood for.
One parallel to the comics that I feel was more of an homage than anything else. But so in her origin issues, she goes through Terrigenesis, and she didn't know she was an Inhuman. There's a
Terrigenesis there's a crystal becomes a mist that you breathe it in, and you get your powers if they were going to come at all.
And you go through a chrysalis,
Inhuman,
right? You get covered in.
If you watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you know Terrigenesis, but basically, as an Inhuman, you get exposed to Terrigen crystals, and it catalyzes your Inhuman power. So you go into a crystalline pod, and then you change shape, or your powers grow, or whatever, and then you come out, and your powers are there. So she has these shape-shifting powers, and when she is in her pod, the only thing she's thinking about this entire time is what would Carol Danvers do? How would she get out of this? I need to go and check in with my family. I need to tell my mom and dad that I'm okay. What would Ms. Marvel, what would Captain Marvel do in this moment? And then when she finally breaks out, she's in the form of Captain Marvel, because that's all she's thinking about. And then so she sees her reflection. She's like, "Holy crap, what is happening?" And then she figures out there's oh, I have these shape-shifting powers, and she turns back into Kamala. And so the end credit scene, or one of the end post-credit scenes of the first season, when she gets shunted into her closet and comes out, and it's Brie Larson, Carol Danvers in the MCU. I really felt that was kind of an homage to that, but then they have the whole like, oh, body switching, yada, yada, yada,
Yeah,
whatever's
and
gonna
that's
happen in
an
Marvel's thing.
that's an homage to the first Captain Marvel, the Kree soldier Marvel, go figure, that's a name, had a body switching thing going on with Rick Jones, who is the most anonymous character to somehow not appear in the MCU yet.
I can't believe he's not. Yeah. But yeah, so as far as commonalities between the two, I really liked that kind of throw-in scene. You have this origin. You have Kamala's origin story in the MCU. You have Kamala's origin story in the comics. And while you can't do everything one-to-one, it was nice to see that parallel.
I think when it comes to things that are different from whatever the source material is to whatever the new media is, like there's always going to be something that's different in some way, right?
Yeah.
And like different people are going to care for different reasons or not care, right? And like I think it's important to like on some level just accept like, yeah, it's okay to not like something just because it's different. Because whatever it was that you liked before, you liked it the way it was. It's like, I liked it that way. That's it, But then if that's how you're going to be, like, you have to understand you're probably going to be disappointed by everything because everything's going to be somewhat different, right? And that's like, that's okay. That's fine. But that's just how it's going to be, right? But like how I really like how you explained how there's two main things that were changed, right? Like she was originally an Inhuman, but then she's a mutant now, and like her powers are different. And
well, there was more than those two things changed. I'm only getting started.
Well, there's only two that I wrote down. We'll get to the longer list, but like how one of those things, like the fact that she's a mutant instead of an Inhuman, it's like, but she was like originally probably supposed to be a mutant. She was just an Inhuman because of rights nonsense, right? Yeah. So it's like that feels like very in line with how you think about the character, right? How that's like very organic and fits with the character in a way that like they basically tried to make the Inhumans the X-Men on screen as well, and then they're like, oh, never mind, we got the rights back, forget the Inhumans. Like,
yeah, there's other reasons they forgot the Inhumans, but yes,
right. Also, they got kind of bucked up, but that on the other hand, like the thing with the shape-shifting and how that really does fit with her character and her character's age and everything, and how I mean, there's reasons that seem more sensible. It's like, oh yeah, when you explain it, I understand why you care. It's like that makes sense. It does feel like it loses something there, right? But like that doesn't mean that like the new thing has to be bad or worse. It's just like it loses something that it had, but like there can be exactly.
Yeah,
you
they're
can have
positives
two
and
different
negatives,
things
honestly.
that are both good.
All right, so I want to make sure we get time to talk about Moon Knight, but Steve, I know you have one or two more things to quick say on Ms. Marvel.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things that was different in the show that didn't work was, and we kind of danced around this before, but going straight to a season-long plot, and it didn't work that it was a save the world plot, but it also didn't work that it, in the comics, we get a lot of Monster of the Week issues to start, and she gets to, spend one or two issues tackling some discrete threat, usually to her neighborhood, and you get to see her in a lot of different situations, and you get to explore her character in a lot of different ways because it's tested by different things, rather than just having this sort of like single overarching plot for the whole season. That just really, it kind of locks her in place. She can only come to one like grand realization by the end of it. So that was, I think, a loss and a miss from the adaptation. As for things that changed that stayed the same, and they absolutely nailed it. Every single character, the casting was incredible. Iman Vellani as Kamala was unbelievable. Every single side character they absolutely nailed. And these were some of the things I was most excited about, loved in the comics. Her parents, her brother, his wife, Nakia, Bruno, Zoe, all these characters are just absolute, all-timers in the comics, and they're so good on screen. They nailed all of it.
Nice.
Yeah, I was
I
actually
felt like-
impressed with how like accurately they portrayed the characters. There was so little changed in her supporting cast
But
to the screen.
But they weren't like limited or nailed down by having to stay the same. I felt like
Right.
every one of those actors just absolutely embodied the character. It was really remarkable. And just a quick specific shout out. I love that Kamala has a family, a loving and supportive family. They're not trying to so many superheroes. It's like, oh, they're an orphan for reasons that we, so that we can introduce some tragic backstory or weird subplot with a parent coming back later. No, she has a loving and supportive family. She's got a community and a cast of characters around her, and it's fantastic. Another,
I thought-
sorry.
Just quick on that, I thought the scenes in the mosque, especially,
Yes.
really kind of drove home. Not only does she have a family, but she has a community, and the fact that she has a community that is basically feared and distrusted and seen with all kind of prejudice and hate by so much of the rest of the community, but they all rally together. I mean, what's a better metaphor for the X-Men? And I think
Absolutely.
that there's a really kind of wonderful thing going on there. Your last thing, and then let's move on to.
This is a way that the show kind of expanded. They were able to bring sort of some comic book elements in with the random like interstitial animations kind of that show up in the real world. You see like drawings, doodles, little things that are like animated or show up just on screen. I thought that was incredibly well done. A really fantastic stylistic element that felt true to its origin as a comic, but also true to the story itself. And I thought that was really incredible.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk about Moon Knight. Will, I know you were a huge fan of the comic, and you had a lot of feelings going into it. In terms of like the what you loved about the character, what was you really looking forward to seeing on screen?
So one thing I was looking forward to seeing that I didn't get to see was a conversation between Jake, Steven, and Mark. Like, in the version of Moon Knight that I wrote in my head before the show came out, all three personalities.
Always a good idea. You'll never be disappointed. That
I know, right? All three identities were present and known, and so like in my head, which we kind of got, Moon Knight was already an established thing. It's just now we get a lens on him, and so Mark, Steven, and Jake working in tandem together to be the best Moon Knight that they can be. That's where I wanted to see on a Mindscape the three of them talking together, or use some. I mean, you've got Oscar Isaac, so use like two different mirrors and show just insane reflections and have him going back and forth, and that would be insane and wild and awesome. But that's fine. I didn't get that, but I'm not upset about it. So other things that I was really looking forward to is, I mean, it is incredibly easy to compare Moon Knight to Batman on 85 different levels, and I'm a Marvel guy, but I do like Batman, and so to have a Marvel Batman, it just makes me excited. And so to have him come from the comics, which is a smaller fan base medium for me to talk about, now in the MCU, where now millions of people have seen it, it just gives me more opportunities to fanboy about Moon Knight with other people that now have a frame of reference for who Moon Knight is. instead of me just saying, "Oh, he's Marvel Batman now." But now people know, "Oh, Moon Knight. Yeah, I know that guy. He was kind of weird in the MCU show." And I'm like, "Yes, I know. Let's talk about it." So I'm just excited that more people know who Moon Knight is now.
Art in the suit, just the use of dark and light is one of my favorite things about Moon Knight, and I was just really excited to hopefully see some really great visuals. That was the main thing for me.
Did you feel like you got those?
No. But I love the show.
I wanted this one thing. I got this other thing.
It's a good point. There's not a lot of darkness.
Yeah.
There's a lot of scenes at night, but not a lot of darkness and shadows used to make Moon Knight stand out within the shadow.
Yeah,
and that's his whole thing. It's like he wears white.
And I can see how that's again the metaphors. Like I can see how that's such an. I can see how like the metaphor is really powerful there. Not only does it look beautiful on page, but so much of his character is about moral grayness and like different parts of him, having different ideas of what is black and white morality and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I can see how that really hits hard for what his character's going for.
Well, and like the moon is literally this bright white thing in this dark night, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. He's not Night. He's
Right.
Moon Knight.
Yeah, it's not the Dark Knight. He's Moon Knight.
Oh my goodness. I really liked the portrayal of Khonshu.
Yes.
He honestly was pretty similar to how he acts in the comics, in terms of just like he shows up and he's just like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you messing up? Let me give you some help." There were a metric ton of complaints about the whole like meeting at the Ennead, and he's like, our argument has to be solid, and then he takes over Mark as his first time being in this room and completely screws up and tries to call out Emmett and it doesn't work, yada yada yada. That was brand new. That's not in the comics. As far as other members of the Ennead that we come across, we've only like ever seen an avatar for like Ra, and that's pretty much it. And so I had no idea what was going to happen going into that room, but it was really fun to watch. I honestly wanted more of that, because I get really excited when gods talk about mortal dilemmas. It's just because they have a different perspective on what we're going through. Just as we as adults have different perspectives on what children are going through. I imagine the exact same perspective for the gods on what the short lifespan of a human is going through. So I wanted more from that scene.
Hopefully most humans don't view children's lives as quite as expendable as most of the gods.
No, but the problems are minuscule. Like, children complain about not getting their nap, and while I complain about that too, I have much bigger things to complain about.
Right.
I can understand that.
So, in just a very brief comparison with like Ms. Marvel, what you were saying, Steve, about kind of I would have loved that kind of like Monster of the Week, like smaller scale kind of stuff to, build the character and then get a second season maybe where there's some larger stakes or whatever. Here in Moon Knight, we also got these like really big stakes, for however brief they really were, in play. But we got the Mark and Steven conversations, right?
Yes.
Did you feel like that was kind of the same idea as like the two of them and Jake, but then like Jake only shows up at the end? Like, to me, that feels like a fairly well measured, let's not try and introduce everything about this character in season 1, and hopefully we get a season 2 or some movie or whatever where we can then kind of go deeper, and because it feels like there's so much depth there that trying to you don't need to kind of like spill it all out in one season.
I agree with that. And
Yeah,
also
absolutely.
it is part of sort of the history of Moon Knight in comics that more of his identities are revealed and portrayed and added as decades go on, and
right.
different creators and different runs. Like, for example, the the Moon Knight with the business suit
Mr.
concept,
Mr. Knight.
that is actually a separate identity
Right.
in the comics, whereas it's not just Steven's version of the Moon Knight suit.
Right.
Well, and I thought,
And
one of the
it
things that I
wasn't
thought-
introduced until the 2010s, whereas
Right,
the
which was
character
like
goes back to
30.
the 70s. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's also huge because we were talking before about how things are going to get updated. And one of the things I was thinking is that there's two of the biggest reasons often are just like page to screen is going to be a big change. But also when something's created 30, 40, 50 years ago and now it's being created again today, we have different understandings of things. And I think in many ways Moon Knight is one of the best of those because the actual mental condition that he is dealing with, what we now know as dissociative identity disorder, like we didn't even have that name when the character was created. Our understanding of it has changed so dramatically. And also, I don't know how much clearly today they did a lot of research, they consulted with people. I don't know if they were consulting with lots of them when they wrote this character in the 70s. I think they were taking the kind of pop notion idea of it. And I thought the way that they did it today, I thought the way they did it in this show, of that we, the audience, learn along with the character what's going on in terms of these different identities. And so therefore, I agree, watching a conversation with Jake would be great for a season 2 or later. But I thought having it the whole time we have this sense that there might be a third identity because things don't quite line up. But then only at the very end do we get to realize that Jake is actually there. And in some ways, that's kind of the one time where we really break it because we don't, Mark Will, I think, doesn't know that yet. To me, it was just such a brilliant way of both taking you inside the character's head and helping you understand the perspectives and the confusion. But also because he's a fundamentally unreliable narrator, it also meant that there wasn't these times where you're like, wait, but these all doesn't line up.
Right.
Because I don't really know what Khonshu is actually like, because all I know is what this system, which is the kind of way you talk about the Moon Knight system of identities, what they know about Khonshu.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I will also say I'm happy and surprised at how accurately how much they kept of his origin. It's very similar to the comics, with the exception of Layla's a brand new character. There's Marlene is the name of the love interest from the comics. Not a big deal. But with Khonshu just kind of choosing Mark as his pet avatar is that relationship and keeping that going from the comics was a lot of fun. I'm glad there wasn't a buddy hey Khonshu, hey Mark, how you doing? There's this potential to do a really big conflict of ideals between the two. Even they had that already in the show, but to the point where Mark and Steve completely reject Khonshu, and then for Jake to come in and be the number one agent, that's going to be so potentially fun. I can't wait. I'm very happily surprised at how they did the whole 3 identities thing, and I want to know what Jake's suit looks like, because there is a third Moon Knight look. Really, there's a third and a fourth that's traditionally used these days, and I want to know if Jake has one of those, and just give me more Moon Knight. That's all I want.
But also make the suit pop just pure white on screen. No grayish suits, even in shadows. Just unnatural fluorescence.
The Mr. Knight look. I would just give me one scene of a completely dark alleyway and Mr. Knight walking up in just a glowing white ambiance behind him. Just give it to me, please.
So the comparisons with Batman don't really include the hide in the shadows creature of darkness.
No. There's a line from the Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey run that started in 2014, where it's the first introduction of Mr. Knight, and they're saying like he's going out fighting crime in the middle of the night with a white suit, but why? Everybody can see him coming, because he's freaking crazy.
Yeah, and his whole thing is just like, I want them to see me coming.
Right.
Whereas Batman is like, I want to cast a shadow on him. It's like, no, don't let your shadow do the talking. How about you do the talking? But
It's different ways of being feared. It's like being
Exactly.
feared
Yeah.
by not being seen versus being feared
Yeah.
by being seen.
he carves crescent moons on people's forehead. Ugh.
So, is there a name for what I can only refer to as the Moonerang? The thing that he throws that looks an awful lot like a batarang.
I don't know,
But it shoots
man.
like a-
Call him. I don't know, crescent discs or something.
all right, they're Moonerangs now. From
Yeah.
now
Yeah,
on.
I'm down
Don't call
for
them something
Moonerang.
Works for me.
What else about the character kind of really struck you, or about the show that you really liked or didn't like? And again, in terms of like less like the costume stuff, but more just in terms of like the character and what they stand for and kind of what the stories are representing and all that.
I thought that Oscar Isaac just absolutely killed it. He just owned every single second that he was on screen and was unbelievably compelling. I thought Steven was a very reimagined character from the comics, but was extremely fantastic, was exactly what the series needed, and was a great character. So that's one of the things that really stood out to me that I enjoyed a lot.
So what is he like in the comics? Because I thought the character of Steven as kind of the first POV character we really get was just utterly brilliant. I'm curious, what is he like in the comics?
Stephen Grant is the money winner, the breadwinner of the three, and he is basically like your Dick Wolf. He's a soap opera like writer and producer. And he has told stories. He's written shows about that are based on like the exploits of Moon Knight.
Right.
But he's the money winner of the three. Mark is
Okay.
the killer, Steven's the money, and Jake Lockley is the intelligence gatherer.
Is Mark still the original identity in
Yes.
the comics? Mm-hmm. Because I did think it's funny, you're talking before about how every character in Marvel, in superheroes in general, often seems to be an orphan. I thought having his character specifically not be an orphan, but that was
gut.
So
You knew it was coming the whole series, and you're
Yeah.
still just like, oh my god.
the way he is estranged from the way that his mother is dead, the brother is dead, and he's estranged from his father, and all of that. It seems so essential to the character instead of it just being, let's just write off a terrible accident because that's a tragic backstory. We're done.
Totally.
I agree with that. I would like to just kind of like throw in for like most of the other superheroes where I feel like that often is an integral part of the character. It's just that it's the same integral part of so many characters. You know, that like when you get like Ms. Marvel, it's nice to like be like, okay, and she has two parents and they know each other and still live together and this can be a thing, you know.
I guess that's a better way to put what I meant is it's not the same paint by numbers that it is for everybody else. It's distinctly different in the way his character is different.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's the same except different. It's not just another iteration. It's like a different version of that type of thing,
Right.
kind of.
Is there anything else on Moon Knight folks want to say?
I just want more Moon Knight. I didn't like the whole sky changing Khonshu thing. That was kind of weird. I want more ground level Moon Knight stuff.
For me, Moon Knight just earned the benefit of the doubt with just the Oscar Isaac's performance and just kind of the base level. Like, I'm here for this character. I enjoy the time on screen and just like how the series unfolds. I don't really care the plot or the mythology or anything else. Just give me more Moon Knight. What you're doing at a very base level works, and I don't really care what the story is.
Very casually, they introduced the idea of other gods and other afterlives. and I loved that. And that it made
true.
It made scenes like the Pantheon of the Gods in Love and Thunder smoother, I guess. Because traditionally we've only had the Norse mythology, but there's so many other mythologies you can pull from. And to introduce Moon Knight, and then at the end of God and Thunder they have Hercules. But like to introduce Moon Knight, you have and for the hippo lady to just be like, oh yeah, there's other afterlives. And you can go and visit them if you want. Just so casually exponentially expanded the ethereal verse of the MCU was so exciting for me, because that's the stuff that just gets me going, is like the big
syncretic
conceptual
mythology.
pictures.
Yeah. We'll wrap up Moon Knight there. I'll just also say that for anyone who wants to hear more of myself, Will, and Paul's thoughts, we did episode by episode coverage of Moon Knight. I think
And
Steve,
Steve
were
was-
you on a couple of those?
Yeah,
don't-
one.
Okay.
We talked about vegetarianism.
Thank you for remembering.
And its depiction on screen.
Yeah.
Well, and so I was supposed to you, as talking about all this, are there any particular comics you'd recommend, either of these two characters or just other characters that have kind of similar stories or they're fun tie-ins? Steve, you want to go first?
Well, I will absolutely limit myself to these two characters, or else I'll be here all day. For Moon Knight, I was doing a little bit of background reading before we hopped on this pod, and the original Moon Knight run of Doug Moench and Bill Sienkiewicz, starting in 1980, is a great. You get to watch one of my favorite artists of all time, Bill Sienkiewicz, go from a pretty straightforward comics artist to like an all-timer. Incredible. Moon Knight number 26 from that volume 1 he's trying to express rhythm and jazz through comics art, and it's incredible. And also just different styles and modes of an abused child through their sketches telling their story. And then the 2014 run, Moon Knight number 1, Warren Ellis and Declan Shalvey, just also absolute tour de force for art. Just awesome. Light and shadow, darkness, pure whiteness for Moon Knight. Yeah, I love Moon Knight art. For Ms. Marvel, read the entire run of G. Willow Wilson, because it's all incredible.
I appreciate that you said you had a pause, but you did name a particular writer. It wasn't just read every Ms. Marvel comic ever.
Well, she was only introduced less than 10 years ago, so there's not that much. But yes, read the entire G. Willow Wilson run. It's about 50 issues, and it tells the full story, and it's so good. Well,
strictly to pull other examples, I guess. Jed McKay's run on Moon Knight was the current run on Moon Knight, and it is so much fun. It is beautiful, and it expands on Moon Knight in ways that I had never personally considered, and so I love it. I just reviewed it on our last episode of our pod. It is so much fun. So check out that run. For Ms. Marvel, to see the kind of leader that she wants to be, you can check out Champions, where basically Ms. Marvel is upset in reaction to another civil war between the superheroes, fighting each other instead of fighting the bad guys. Ms. Marvel and other young heroes decide that they can do better, and they can be the inspirational heroes that their mentors should be. And so if you want to see that side of a leadership quality of Miss Marvel, of Kamala, check out Champions.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you all so much for being a part of this. Obviously, for folks who want to hear more of you, Hype is My Superpower seems like the podcast, but if one or both of you want to just say a moment or two about what exactly that is.
Oh, it's
You're
a podcast.
pointing at each other doesn't make good radio.
It's a podcast where we talk about the things that we are hyped on, namely comics, and specifically We get a very obnoxiously completionist streak for both of us. So Will reads every single trade paperback of mainstream Marvel comic continuity that comes out. I decided once upon a time, in a decision I regret a lot, that I would read every X-Men comic ever published. And I'm in 1999 right now, and it's real bad. But it's fun to talk about. And we're also reading Sandman right now, which is one of my favorite. That's really giving me life, keeping me afloat. Neil Gaiman, Sandman, yes. Sorry.
You're reading every mutant comic, not just X-Men. Like
yeah.
Excalibur.
Oh, yeah, all of the all the spin-offs, of course.
All
of course.
that stuff.
I hate myself that much. It's true.
Well, I'm glad you suffer through it so that we don't have to. Because one of the best things they do on their podcast is they summarize the episode enough, or the issues enough, that I feel like I could read it if I feel inclined, but I don't have. I've now learned what I need to about it.
It feels like you read it.
Yeah. I could pass an English test about it, probably.
Yeah.
Not
could
B
get a
plus
passing
work,
grade.
but I could get a sneak in there with a C. And Paul, people. So hype is my superpower. And then for either of you, are there Twitter, Twitch, other things you want to promote?
I've got a Twitch. It's Silver Dreamer, Silver with a Y. On Sundays, we read comics on stream, which I think is against TOS, but I'm small enough that nobody knows about me.
Also, the Y is where you think.
It is where you think. And then also, I build Lego. I build model kits. So like Legos, Gundam, Book Nooks, whatever random thing my wife buys that she wants me to put together. I do that during the week, and we read comics on Sundays.
I also I write comics and self-publish them. I have a series called The Pros, and if you look hard enough, you might even be able to buy it.
Awesome. And Mr. Happy?
Yeah, I'm Zen Madman on Twitch and Twitter, and I just want to use this moment to give a shout out to people who didn't go to high school, because not everyone had that experience.
True.
Some people were homeschooled. Some
You're
people
not
maybe
wrong.
didn't have the economic opportunity. Some people made the choice not to go. So I just want to recognize you. That's all. Yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate that greatly. So this podcast is a The Ethical Panda podcast. That's me, The Ethical Panda. If you go to theethicalpanda.com, you'll find all of the superhero ethics episodes, as well as all of Star Wars Universe podcast episodes. We're right now doing episode-by-episode coverage of Andor. The show has not upset Paul yet. We're still fingers crossed that we can get to the end of the season, but we're going pretty well. Had some great discussions there, had some great guests. And, of course, if you look back on superhero ethics stuff, you'll find other episodes that both Will and Steve, either together or separately, have been guests on, had great conversations with. So please check all that out. And, of course, on that website, most importantly, you'll find the way to give us feedback. What did you love about these characters? What did you not like? Or what do you think were interesting questions raised by the comics that the shows covered differently or not at all, or vice versa? All the contact information is on there. You can also find my TikTok, Twitter, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm going to have myself, all the good people out here, all the people who both did and did not go to high school, and all the people who are just doing out there, people in their best day. And anyone else I can think of because my mind is blank. On behalf of all of you, you're all fighting your own revolution. Have a good day.